My name my parents gave me was Clasian Jude Joseph, and I was originally born in Sri Lanka. We're a family of five, and I was the last of the siblings. So I was born in 1981, not the greatest time being in Sri Lanka at that time, roughly at around the same time where the civil war between the Tamils and the Sinhalese broke out. So essentially it was very difficult. We moved from city to city in Sri Lanka. Roughly in 1985, my dad thought he'll look at coming to Canada. So he went to Canada by himself, leaving my mom and with my brother, my sister, and myself to take care of in a very difficult situation. My mom was a practicing Christian, same with my dad. She completely believed in Jesus and God in terms of getting us through the difficult times, and even till today she always reflects on that. So every Sunday we never missed church, even in Sri Lanka, and being raised up in Canada. And a few years after my dad was here, we had a rough situation where it got a lot worse, and we were deciding whether my dad comes back and takes care of things, or do we just leave everything that we grew up and come to a whole new country. I think there's a few events that happened while being in Sri Lanka really shaped my parents' decision. One of them being was we were trapped in a very intense situation where the war got quite bad, and I've seen things, people and buildings destroyed, which really impacted me at that time, and also my mom, knowing that this is a situation I'm going to be raising my kids in. So in 1989, my mom decided, you know what, this is enough. We need to reestablish ourselves somewhere else. So we all migrated to Canada, right to Toronto. And oddly enough, when my dad left, I was only 4, and when I came to Canada in 1989, I couldn't remember my dad. So it was interesting enough that I had to reestablish kind of my relationship with my father. And we grew up relatively as a small family, because we didn't have much family in Canada at that time. So we didn't have anyone to really reach out to, other than one direct family of my mom. But we learned and struggled, to establish ourselves what we have today. And my parents worked really hard, take care of us, made sure that we were well educated, but also not losing our principles, and which was very key for my parents. My parents enrolled me in Sunday school at church to make sure that I was well versed with the principles of Jesus, and not to lose your faith in and be just really wild, right? So they had a very strong hold on that, and they instill a lot of morale in all of us, and a lot of respect for each other. So I went through high school in Scarborough, and that's when I really started getting to know people from different faiths and different cultures. And that's when I really started establishing kind of my identity as being Canadian, as being, getting to know different religions and different cultures, and really understanding, their intake on how a person should be. Majority of my high school I spent learning a lot about Buddhism, because I had a lot of Oriental friends. So I'd celebrate, Chinese New Year with them. I go to Chinese restaurants. I was part of, their family. They'd give me like money from Chinese New Year. So it was very exciting. I got to know a lot about Buddhism through, that channel. I had a lot of Hindu relatives by that time who migrated to Canada. And I was exposed to their traditions and what they do and their belief system. All in all, at that time, I still felt that I was very happy to be Christian, knowing the principles that I had. Only when I started in early university, that's when I was in a situation I felt I wasn't being the person that I should be. I felt that as a Christian, there's lots of principles in terms of how you should develop yourself. But to put that into practice, it was lacking. There wasn't a guidance in terms of what you should do and shouldn't do, but rather how overall makeup of a person should be. So I stumbled a lot. I take one step towards, being closer to Jesus, and I'll take 10 steps back. And I'm wondering, why am I, doing this, and this is not what I was raised up to be. My parents wouldn't be happy if, with me behaving in such a way. So I was looking for something. I felt like I was missing something. I felt like I needed some help. I needed to better understand. I even looked at maybe I should become a priest. I remember my parents would go to Montreal like every summer for a long weekend, and their main objective was to go there and go to the church and then come back, right? They felt like every trip they had to make had to revolve around the church, right? It was their pilgrimage, right? So it was good because it made me take a step away from, my friends and my studies and my work, and really kind of have that free time. And a lot of the times I started reflecting while I was there, am I happy here? Am I content? Is this what makes me feel good? And when I come back, am I implementing what I've learned, right? And I felt like I wasn't doing that. And that's when, during that time, my first year university, is when quite a few of my Muslim friends started asking me. And they're like, have you looked into Islam? Have you, looked at, what we do and what our practices are, or you looked at even your own faith and why do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? And I remember the most common phrase was did you know that Ali's written on the moon, right? I'm like, what? How is that possible? I see the moon all the time, right? So it was interesting that I was exposed to this, but I didn't accept it. I thanked them for it, but I didn't really care to know. Until I met one person, a very humble, a very nice individual who I looked up to in terms of his character and his morale. And even though I was fairly good friends with him, I didn't really listen to him when it comes to religion. He was, I considered him as a person that I can look up to in terms of, just being teenagers or being, being friends. But not as someone who I can refer to as in terms of religion. But there's one thing that happened that struck me. It was actually a very simple thing, but rather it had a profound impact. So one day we went to Tim Hortons, which is the most popular coffee shop in Canada, and one of our friends was working there, and we ordered something, and he delightedly wanted to give us the beverages for free. And I didn't think anything of it, and I was willing to just take that cup of coffee. And this is when my friend stepped in and said that, this is not, you don't own this, Tim Hortons, and I don't feel right taking it from you. And I'd rather pay for it, even though you are a friend. I feel better if I pay for it. It's a simple act of fairness and justice, but to practice it was profound. I think every person, regardless of faith and culture, all understand the fact that taking something that's not yours is not right. Regardless if someone gives it to you, you have to make sure that it was rightfully given to you. And everyone would agree with that. But to practice it in a very minute detail like that meant a lot more to me. So that's when I looked at, where is this coming from? How was he able to practice this, and while I wasn't able to? So that's when I inquired, teach me more. And, I want to learn something, right? I want to study it. Doesn't mean that I'm going to be Muslim. I just want to know what's your philosophy behind it. So it was interesting enough, during the same time, he actually, or a few months later, he was going to Iran for ziyarat. So I asked him, if we go there, get me a book on philosophy. I just want to know philosophy of Islam, what your practices are and why you do it. There has to be a reason for it. So he decided, fine, I will do that. I will get you a book. And he got me a book, Philosophy of Islam by late Ulama Beheshti. And that was my first book in Islam, so I was excited. It's interesting enough, during that same time, I was taking philosophy as a subject in university. I was doing engineering, but one of the electives. And the teacher posed a very interesting question was, why does God not like man to kill each other? Everyone had social answers in terms of social equality. And I felt that it was much more than that. So my contribution in that class was that, well, if God made us in his likeness, then why would he want us to kill something of his likeness unjustly? So he wouldn't want that from us, right? And that's when it rang a bell, and I'm like, wait a minute. There's much more to life than just a social balance, and providing someone with social equality, or being fair and just towards them for the reasons of society, right? There had to be a deeper meaning towards it. So when he brought that book back from Iran, I was excited to go into it. And that's when I started reading and uncovering, different practices within Islam that really defined things while growing up. One of the things that was very important to me that I learned through childhood was modesty. My parents were very conservative in their dress, in how we behave outside, but more importantly when it came to modesty. Even when at home, when we used to watch TV, whenever there was a vulgar scene or something that's inappropriate that we shouldn't see, immediately they would change the channel. They wouldn't allow us to watch it. That was the rule in the household. And I liked that, and it taught me a lot about how to be outside, And when I learned about hijab, I was like, this is perfect. This teaching of morality now has a practice towards it. So not only does a person has to fight with this and having to, lower his eyes or, do something drastic. No, there is actually a solution that will prevent it, right? I felt at that point was what I've learned through my parents in terms of being, practicing the morally conduct way. Look, there's a solution for it, that we didn't need to take these extreme measures if this measure was taken in place, right? So to me, that was profound. And that's one of the main things that kept me going in terms of learning more about Islam. I found that to be phenomenal. Then when I start learning more and more regarding the practices, regarding charity, regarding, how you earn your living and where the money comes from, then it started making more sense. We look at charity is such a huge thing in Christianity, but how far Islam takes it regarding where does that money come from, who you are charitable to, the whole concept of charity, to your wife, to your family, to your community, and then to the world at large, shows how you build from within out, right? And how a good structured family can help the community, and how a good structured community can help the society. So that layer that Islam presents itself was too beautiful. It reminds me a lot about nature and how Allah has created the world, and I wasn't a person that really loved nature, really loved to see things in this world that resembled our religion, resembled our lifestyle. So that whole layered piece of how Islam presented itself was beautiful for me. So this is when my journey began. And this is when I felt like I was reborn and, was relearning life. I think the key turning point in my life in terms of embracing Islam and really, accepting it as a way of life is